So I'm going to make this. Today is the 83rd anniversary. Today is 83 years since the previous Rebbe stepped foot. Adar. He's a Adar. At the Frierdiker Rebbe came to this country, as the Rebbe says it, for the second time, Amanas Ishtakeya to settle. Now, if you need a remez, there's a remez. In Lubavitch, you don't hear this because Lubavitch is Bechal Madin Tenarishkeiten. But there's some people who say that 83 is the second bar mitzvah. Because the life of a person is 70 years. So 71 starts over. So 83 is in the Welt. There's actually some cultures, if a person lives Larichas Yom V'Shonim Tevis till 83, they make like a second bar mitzvah. So this is the second bar mitzvah since the Frierdiker came to America. So I want to say this. I want to say this to you, Kindalach. One of the great gifts of Chassidus, well, not one of the greatest, the greatest gift of Chassidus, is the relationship between a regular person and a tzaddik and a Rebbe. We really don't have the ability to appreciate how much we have nothing in common. A Rebbe is another beast. But one of the things that Chassidus created is that this holy man is dafke involved with regular people. Dafke involved with regular people. And in Chabad there's an additional component which is even weirder. Not only is the Rebbe involved with regular people, but to use the quotation, he needs us. The Gemara says in the end of Masechet Ksubos, "Lebonei ani tzarich, ich darf haben meine Kinder, I need my children." Now Rebbe's sons, when Rebbe says he had two biological sons. When the Rebbe says Lebonei ani tzarich, he means each of us. This is a fantastic chiddush that the Baal Shem Tov brought into the world, which is called in the Hayom Yom, to remove the loneliness from the world. And so we have a relationship with the Rebbe and the Frierdiker Rebbe. What do we know about the relationship? We really know nothing. We mamish don't know nothing. In other words, we can never begin to appreciate how lucky we are that we have this relationship, and if I may say something honest and painful, and how poorly we represent our half. You know, as much as we do and as hard as we try, we're involved with a man who should not have anything to do with people like us, but he's our Rebbe. Having said that, I want to tell this to you. I have a recording, I have a tape of a Yid whose name is Shmuel Isaac Popak, Olav Shalom. Shmuel Isaac Popak, I don't know if he was born in America, but he certainly came here as a boy. His father was a Tomim. His father lived in one of the northern states, mamish on top of America, on the East Coast. No, somebody give me a name of a state. Vermont. That's good. Vermont. He was a shoichet in Vermont, and now the shliach in Vermont is his granddaughter. Raskin is married to a Popak. To his Shmuel Isaac's daughter. But his father, Avram Popak, who was a Tomim, was a Chassidish Yid, was a sheichet in Vermont. Shmuel Isaac was the oldest of a number of brothers. He was a very, very rich man, right? Mr. Popak was a very, very wealthy man. By the time I knew him, he had a big beard, but most of his life he didn't have a beard. He was a businessman. And Shmuel Isaac was a bocher when the Rebbe came in 1940. Now, in 1940, there was no such thing in America as a young man with a beard. It just didn't exist. It plain didn't exist. Old people with a beard, maybe. A young person with a beard, chas v'sholem. Shmuel Isaac was a big chaver man. He didn't become a chaver man in his old age. He tells in that tape, I told this to Heitevis, the Frierdiker called him in. I said, I want you to be the business manager of 770 and come to me every month and collect rent. Remember I told you that? I told you that, right? Someone say yes. Yeah. Thank you. Now someone say yes with sincerity. But Shmuel Isaac tells these words. The Rebbe came off the boat. He was in a wheelchair, the Frierdiker Rebbe. He couldn't walk him out. And he had a very difficult time talking. People couldn't know what he was saying. Before the wheels of that wheelchair set foot on terra firma, in other words, there's a video of him coming off the gangplank, that little drawbridge that they put down for the ship to connect to the sea. Before his wheels landed on the ground of New York, in his words, he was shooting with all cylinders. The Rebbe was holding 6 guns and he was shooting. The Rebbe had no money, didn't have a home, had no people, had no understanding. He knew America because he had been here for a year, and the Rebbe is a pretty smart guy. When the Rebbe travels the country for a year, he downloads it, he assesses it, he gets it. And he said, I'm going to make America to Makom Teda. And what the Frierdiker Rebbe did when he first got here was, he just started a bunch of things. I cannot tell you, I don't know how to say this gently, how many failures he had. How many things the Frierdiker Rebbe did that blew up in his face? But his faith, his emunah, and that this is what he needs to do. It's what the Eibishter wants. And if the Eibishter wants it, it's going to happen. It was so indefatigable. It was so he couldn't exhaust it that he tried and he tried and he tried and he tried. And something stuck. You know, the Mesiras Shabbos, the first project, was getting public school kids from homes, mind you, to come Shabbos afternoon and make brachas. And here at Paltiel, we're going to public school. Then, of course, the mitzvah, the biggest early accomplishment of Lubavitch was called the Release Time program, where thousands of public school kids got Torah instruction. They'll still do it today, but then it was mamish atzolos nefashos. And then the schools, and then the Beis Rivka, and then Merkez, and then the printing. The Rebbe just did, and he did, and he did, and he did. And everything he did gave such limited successes. The Frierdiker Rebbe saw what? 2 Chassidish Bacharim, 3 Chassidish Bacharim, 5 Chassidish Bacharim. The Rebbe saw so many kids, but his attitude was, the only thing that's wrong is to say, this is overwhelming. I can't, there's a story with the Rebbe that I always tell, where most people tell the story for the other reason. I tell the story for this reason. The Rebbe said to a group of Lubavitchers, who he was very displeased with, the Rebbe de Schwer hat gewollt sehen, als Amerika soll sein am Mokum Tere. Hat es nicht sicher gewöhnt zu sehen. Ich bin das ja sicher zu sehen. Which means in English, the Rebbe Rayatz, the Frierdiker Rebbe, wanted to see that America should be a place of Torah. A place of Torah doesn't mean a place people learn. There were big Talmidei Chachamim in the 1940s, 50s in America. There was a YU, Yeshiva University, had a very, very good college, and they learned Talmud very well. And they knew many Mesichtas, but that's not a Mokum Torah. That's a Mokum college, where Torah is a subject. The Rebbe wanted a Mokum Torah. Mokum Torah means where Torah saturates the bones, the kishkis. What the centrists call, what the modern Orthodox call, the disease of the black hat, you know. The disease of the black hat, which has swept America, didn't start till the 70s. Meaning, it took 30 years for not only for to be good things going on, but to change the thinking. America is nicht anders. You didn't see right away America respond to that. It took a very long time. And the Rebbe said, the Rebbe de Schwer, das nicht sicher gewesen zu sehen. The Frierdiker Rebbe did not merit to see it. I see it. This is who this man was. And there are many people in this room that if not for the Frierdiker Rebbe, would Pashat not have been born. Forget about you wouldn't be from. You wouldn't have been born. You would not have been born. And the Rebbe was Mesiras Nefesh to continue what Yiddishkeit is. To continue what Yiddishkeit is. Now we're little cogs, you know, we're little people. And we ask ourselves a Pashta Shaila. Okay, the Rebbe was a great man, he did great things, but I want to live my life. And you know what? You're entitled. You're really entitled. But we're Lubavitchers. Which means that we're not going to be able to rest. Something inside of us is going to say, I'm connected to this tzaddik, or to these tzaddikim. I got to do something. In an official capacity, as officially a shliach or a machanach, a teacher, or in an unofficial capacity, the Lubavitcher fire that burns inside each one of us. When a day like today comes, this is what you remember. This is what I think about. I didn't know that. I'm named after the Frierdiker Rebbe. An old, broken man who couldn't walk and couldn't talk came to this country and he wouldn't rest. He wouldn't rest. Not because he had thousands of people to meet, because he had one person to meet. I told this to you at a previous occasion. There's a man named Uri Kaplun, Rabbi Uri Kaplun. Uri Kaplun is my father's age. That means he's in his 80s. Uri Kaplun spent most of his adult life living in Eretz Yisrael, living in Yerushalayim, writing books in English. He's one of the great Lubavitcher translators. With the early Chabad translators, he did a very, very good job. Uri Kaplun. Uri Kaplun is born in Australia in the 1930s. In the 1930s, there was no Yiddishkeit. His Zayde was what the Rebbe called the Avraham Avinu of Australia, whose name was Moshe Zalman Feiglin, Alav Shalom, who came to Australia in 1911, 112 years ago. And he raised Kidalach, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 from children, who built Yiddish mishpachas. 10. I think 10, maybe 12, 10. But all from. There was not a from kid around for thousands of miles. Verstehst das meint? Always got to send from a kid to him. When his wife passed away, he wrote a letter to the Rebbe. They say about Sitkan is not the word. You know what it means? They moved away from Melbourne because in Melbourne there were Yidden. but they were Yidden who were Australian Yidden. The Jews of Melbourne said, you don't want to live here. He went to live Dafka Tzvishen Goyim in the suburbs of Melbourne, where there was no influence. Him and his wife raised 10 children. It's not believed. Uri Kaplun is his grandson. So Uri Kaplun writes, so he wrote a book about his grandfather, which I would advise you to read. It's actually well written. He knows how to write in English. He knows how to write. He's not Paltiel. It's called The Avram Avinu of Australia. It's a wonderful read. It's quite dense. You know, there's some books for easy reads. I am an Paltiel. I read very slowly, but it's a very good book, well written. And one of the quotes he has in this book is that the Rebbe said once in a Frierdiker, our Rebbe said, the Rebbe de Schwer hat gesagt, als wird sich nicht legen, schlafen. The Rebbe Dayat said, I will not lay down to go to sleep. And the Rebbe Dayat was a sick man until they put in the mail the talks and tales for one child from Australia. The Rebbe said, I'm not going to go to sleep until you put in the mail the talks and tales for a kid, one kid in Australia. And Uri Kaplun writes in that book, I know that story because I'm that child. You understand? This is what the Frierdiker Rebbe did. One kid, get the talks and tales. What's the big deal? That's the big deal. You have to value every yid. Okay, I'm sorry, I got carried away. Go ahead, talk. It's not normal. You guys don't understand what this means. The Frierdiker Rebbe was so holy and he was so intelligent. He could have davened, he could have learned, and he thought about a kid in Australia getting talks and tales. Because he understood his job, you know. I think about this. We had 7 Rebbes. You know that? Some Rebbes became Rebbe younger. Some Rebbe became, the Mesiras became Rebbe at 32, which is the youngest. Some Rebbe became Rebbe older. The oldest one to become a Rebbe was our Rebbe. He became a Rebbe was 49. The Frierdiker was 15 years old, 15 years old. And his father stole his life from him. His own father, the Rebbe Rashab, who, by the way, when the Frierdiker was a child, was never in Lubavitch. The Frierdiker writes in the Reshima between the ages of, listen to this, between the ages of 9 and 11, I didn't have a father. The Frierdiker writes, between the 9 and 11, between the ages of 9 and 11, I didn't have a father. Think about it. The Rebbe Rashab was sick, he traveled a lot, he took his wife with him. In other words, Frierdiker was raised not by his father, not by his mother, by his grandmother. And at 15, this man, who barely was around when he was a child, tells him, I'm taking you to Akedah. Akedah's Yitzchak. You know, the Rebbe Rashab took his son on his 15th birthday to the oil for an Akedah. And he says, from this moment forward, you're a servant of the Jewish people, and you're going to serve the Jewish people with Mesiras Nefesh. The Frierdiker Rebbe served 55 years. He lived 70.
So I have a question.
He served 1 second. He served 55 years. Think about that. There is no Lubavitch Rebbe. And Bechlal, you find a Gadol B'Yisrael who from the age of 15, his father makes him a Soil Azazel. His father lived 25 more years. The Rebbe Rashab lived 25 years. Frierdiker Rebbe became a Rebbe at 40. But at 15, he says to his son, you belong to the Jewish people. The only explanation I have that's reasonable is that Rebbe Rashab knew what the Frierdiker generation was going to be. That the Rebbe Rashab threw Baruch Koche, that the Frierdiker Rebbe needs all the training. Now, I don't think that Rebbe Rashab took a 15-year-old boy and, in my view, ruined his life. And I don't mean his life, his vacations and his summer plans. I mean his Avodah Hashem life, his Torah, his Avodah, because he needed help. I don't think that's the reason. I think that Rebbe Rashab knew what the Frierdiker Rebbe's generation was going to be. So he spent 25 years, and that's how Frierdiker Rebbe describes it. I had 25 years of training under my father's hands about what it means to serve. But this is who this man was. And he didn't stop for an instant till he stopped breathing. Go ahead.
So the Frierdiker Rebbe was Rebbe during the time there was like a war going on. It was very low time for the Jews.
The worst.
So
how about a Holocaust?
How did he help those Jews who, not the Jews who were from, like living in hard conditions? How do you help the Jews who are not from anymore? Who are like
that's what he did when he came here.
And stuff?
That's what he did when he came here.
So how is he so successful? Like
he wasn't. Our Rebbe is successful. But his success is built on that. That's the whole point. The Frierdiker Rebbe worked so hard for such limited success. But he started. You need to understand something, and this is very hard for you to understand. Have you ever heard of people called Satmar?
Yeah.
We were the original Satmar. We were more radical than them. We were more judgmental than them. We were more intolerant than them. Lubavitch, in the old country, was the biggest Kanoim. The Rebbe lands on this ship and does a 180. Completely changes his philosophy. It was shocking. The Satmar Rebbe couldn't believe it. The Getter Rebbe couldn't believe it. The Belzer Rebbe couldn't believe it. A man who was always on the cutting edge of the complaining and the protesting becomes Mr. Nice Guy. Oh, but Mr. Nice Guy, not shir. Every Jew is good. You have to love and hug every Jew. This is an incredible thing. Why did the Rebbe do it? For the same reason before. He was a kanoi. Now he became a different kind of kanoi. When the world needed criticism, he gave criticism. And the world needed love, he gave it. The Rebbe used to say that he would go into the Frierdiker Rebbe and complain about the Frierdiker Rebbe's open-mindedness. And he said, no, there's no such thing as a bad Jew. And this is the same man who just a few years before was the most powerful voice criticizing the anti-religious movements that existed in Europe and so on. That's part of the story. But you say, the success is now, but it's built on that unbelievable Mesiras Nefesh. The Frierdiker Rebbe worked so hard for so little. Today, Shluchim, with all due respect, work so little for so much. Lefiyach, everything is relative. But the success of today is because of what happened 30, 80 years ago. And it was blood. It was so hard. It was so many disappointments. There was so many disappointments. Everybody been in trouble. The Fruma, the Freie, the Yidden, the Goyim.
Do you have an example?
Of what? I don't have time to talk about this now. I want to talk about Purim. But that's the answer to your question.